Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, good evening. How are you? How's everything?
Um, Everything is going well.
Fantastic. Okay. Sorry to make you wait. Apologize. Oh, okay. Do you see the writing on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Just gonna text them to see if they're coming.
Yes.
Okay. So up to Kafchet 28. So it says like this here. Kataba Rivash B'tshuva. It says the Rivash in the Tshuva in the response. Sheladat Ramban. According to Ramban, Pek Bet Gitin. Second parak of Gittin, the Sefer Torah, the Tefillin, Mezuzot. So it says over there that Sefer Torah and Tefillin and Mezuzot, im nichnas rosh halamed be'avir ahei. So now the question is like this: when the head of the lamed goes in, sticks in to the airspace of the hay, which is above it. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So is there a problem with that? That's the question. Or chet, or the same thing with a chet. Afilu below negia. It's not touching, but the top of it is going to the airspace of the bottom of the chet or the hay, in the top, in the line above. That's what we're talking about. So it says pasul. It's pasul according to this opinion. The Divrei Ramban katavaran. So it says the words of the Ramban are written in the Ran, the Perush halachot beperek hanizkar. In the Perush of the Halachot, in the aforementioned Perek. Okay, that's it. Very short one. So here we'll see the Shulchan Aruch and see how he goes there.
So the space of the lamed, the top cannot be on top of the hay. Is that what they were saying?
What we're
Like
saying is that, again, the top of the lamed sticks into the bottom of the hay, which is above it.
above. Okay.
That's the story. Okay, let's see what we can do here. Right, Kaf Zayin. This one we already did. Going to Kafchet. Okay. Lamed Bet. So it says like this in Shulchan Aruch. Kol od shehi ktuba shelo ketikna. No, I'm sorry. This is the wrong one. This is Kaf Hey. We did this yesterday. Okay, I'm sorry. So it says like this. Yesh lizaher. You gotta be careful. Shelo yikanes rosh halamed be'avir ha'hei. So you have to be careful that the top of the lamed doesn't go into the airspace of the hay or a chet or the chet. Even though they're not touching, right? So, as we said, right, this is the situation. So there's a tshuva like this brought down the Rivash. So therefore, we have to be careful not to do that. So even though the two letters, again, right, just to recap, even though the two letters are not touching, nevertheless, there is an issue. Why? Because one is going to the airspace of the other, right? The space of the other, the hollow airspace, whatever we want to call it, right? The hollow part. So how is that working? As we said, right, that the lamed has like a big head, like a big thing, like a giraffe, has a big head there. So what happens is that it encroaches into the airspace of a letter which is above it, which is a hey or a chet, goes in there, it penetrates in, right? So that's no good. So we have to fix that, right? If that's the case, you can't leave it like that. So as we said, right, there are times you can fix these kinds of things. Sometimes you can't fix them, depending on how you did it. We already talked about that yesterday. But you can't leave it this way. That's what we're saying, right? It's not kosher. All right, whatever. But that's the story. Okay, very good. Let's go to Kaftet. Okay, Kaftet. Let's see the bit Yosef and everything. So it says like this in the bit Yosef. ובהתחלת הכתיבה, oh no, this is not the way it is. One second. Here we are. So it says, וצריך שיכתוב מתוך הכתב. So you have to write it from the writing. What does that mean? You have to copy it over already from something which is written. Not just write it orally, right? That's the general rule. But he says, meanwhile, however, so since the Sofrim already know this, like, they're regular to do it. They've done already like dozens of them like this, With these 4 parshiot, when it comes to Tefillin, so therefore they can write them orally. Right? That's without having to look at the writing. So that's what the Torah says. And says the Bet Yosef over here. Perek Shnei de Megillah. This is in the second parak of Megillah. Yud Chet Amud Bet. Perek HaKometz also there. Lamed Bet Amud Bet. Asur lichtov ot echad. Look what it says in the Gemara, right? You're not allowed to write one letter shalom min haktav without looking at copying it over from a written source. Umaskinan the tefillin mezuzot nichtavin shalom min haktav. So, but the conclusion of the Gemara there is that what? When it comes to tefillin and mezuzot, you don't need that. Why is that? Because everybody knows these things by heart. The people who are writing them, they're doing it day and night. So therefore, there's no reason for them to look, again and again, looking at the same thing, 1,000 times. Doesn't not really necessary. So when do you really need to look? As we said, right? When it comes to Sefer Torah, you have to look. Why is that? Because who knows the Sefer Torah by heart, right? As we said, there was Rabbi Meir in the Talmud, he knew it by heart. We don't know the Sefer Torah by heart, you know what I mean? So we have to copy it over. That's what we're saying, right? Okay, very good. So then he goes on to say, What's the reason why? So he says, Migras Gerisan. They already know it already. They're familiar with it. Rashi explains there, Sheguroten Befi. Right? They already know it by heart. Hakol b'yesh kol. Yesh li tmoa. So he says there's some kind of a question here, a wonder. Al Rabbeinu, the Tur. Lama katav kan tzarich shechtov mitoch haktav. Why did he say you have to copy it over? In other words, what was the point of saying first you have to copy it over and then saying no, you don't have to copy it over? Like the Talmud, the conclusion was that you don't have to copy it over. So then why write that? Here, what's the point? That's the question he's asking. Since the conclusion of Talmud is that it's written it can be written without looking at the written source. He himself wrote that, the Torah. So he says the question is, right, why did he write it this way? What's the purpose of that? So he says maybe we can say he wrote this in order to teach us. If you have a sofer, right? And he's not so experienced, he's a novice, like starting out, right? He doesn't really know these things by heart yet. He's just starting out, he's breaking into the business, he's a Trojan horse, whatever, right? So he really shouldn't write even one letter, even if it's a little bit familiar to him, without seeing the writing, without copying it over. So it depends on who you are and what you are, right? If you're an experienced sofer, fine, you don't need it. But if you're not so experienced, so then copy it over. Don't be an adventurer, right? Don't go into adventures. Don't be a cowboy. Do it the right way. That's the idea. Okay, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. We're doing Lamed. So it says the Shulchan Aruch. No, I'm sorry. We're doing Kaftet, not Lamed. So it says Im and a parshiot shgrot befiv, as we said, right? If the parshiot, these parchments, these writings are not, he doesn't know that, he's not familiar with them, doesn't know them by heart. Then he has to copy it over, right? And by the way, I just want to point out one thing, right? That all the more so, you have to be careful with this. You know why? Because even if you know, let's say, the words by heart, but what you may not know is how to spell them. Because as we said, right, that in the Torah, sometimes things are written without a vav, and it's supposed to be with a vav, like in general, In general, we write it with a vav or with a yud. But in the Torah, it's written with no yud and no vav. So if you do it the wrong way, you add an extra letter, it's pasul, as we already explained, right? So therefore, you have to be very careful when it comes to this. You have to make sure, right, you're writing it with the right spelling. That's also a very important thing, because the classic cases like this, right, that shalosh, right, the word shalosh, which means 3, can be written with a vav or without a vav. They're both kosher, but you have to check how the Torah writes it, right? That's the whole thing. You're copying it from the Torah, so you have to spell it the way the Torah spells it. That's the whole thing, Since you're writing sections of the Torah, so you have to spell it the right way. Okay, very good. So that's the story there. Let's go to Lamed. Back to Bet Yosef. Okay. Lamed is skipped over here. Here we are. Okay, so it says like this: Katul Perek Kama de Masechet Sofrim. It says in the first parak of Masechet Sofrim, right, which is like one of the tractates of the Talmud, right? Halacha Yud Bet. Eno Rashai Lichtov Ela Inken Yodea Likrot. Right? Look what it says. Right? You're not allowed to write Tefillin unless you know how to read the Tefillin. You have to know how to read. So if you're illiterate, right, don't try to write Tefillin. Not a good idea. That's what it's saying, right? The Katva Mordechai, the Sofa Berachat Tefillin. He also writes this to Mordechai. So therefore, that's the halacha. Very simple halacha, right? Make sure you are literate if you want to write tefillin. That's pretty much what we're saying. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Very simple. So as we said, right, you're not allowed to write unless he knows how to read. Very simple. Okay, good. Let's go on. Lamed Aleph. Next one. Here we go. So it says, Veshikra kol teva, Veshikra kol teva kodem sheichtevena. Another thing he says is, right, that before you write any word, says the Torah, you have to first read the word. In other words, say it, say it out loud. Ken katub b'sefer HaTruma, says Bet Yosef. It's also written in Truma like this. Siman kuf tzadikhet over there. The Tama, what's the reason why? Why should you have to do this? Mishum de'ita b'perek HaKometz, because it says in Kometz, in the Gemara there, Lamed Amud Bet, Amud Aleph, I'm sorry, Ad be'amot Moshe, Kadosh Baruch Hu Omer. So it says until that point, in the end of the Torah, in the end of the Chumash, it says that Moshe died, right? So the question is, since Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Torah, right? Who wrote that he died? What did he write it as he was dying, or what? How did that happen, right? That's the question that they're asking here. It's sort of a anomaly, right? Whatever. So it says, Moshe. So until that point where it says that Moshe died, Hashem was telling him what to write, and Moshe was writing. That's the way it was. Right? The order of business over there. I'm saying, yeah. Yeah.
Rabbi.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Did Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu that he was going to die and he's supposed to write it down?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What was that again?
So Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was going to die. Did Hashem tell him that to write it, that he was going to die in a
So here's the thing, right? That if it's the way you say, there's a little bit of a problem, because he's lying, because he didn't die yet. You know what I mean? Like he has to say the truth. You know what I mean? So if he's still alive,
he's writing the future.
How can he say that he died?
Maybe he was revealed that how he was gonna die and when he was gonna die.
Right, but the Torah is all truth. You know what I mean? It's a truthful narrative. So you can't write something which is not true. If you're not dead, don't say you're dead. Very simple. You can't do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what's the answer, Rabbi?
And you should know, by the way, it's the same thing when there's a halacha that comes out from that, which is, when it comes to shtarot, like documents, like when you read documents in the Jewish law and halacha, you can't say something there which is a lie, and sometimes it makes the document pasul, because even though everything is good there, everything is kosher, but the fact that there was a lie there can make the whole document pasul. So it's a very big problem, to lie. That's why it says in the Torah, right? Stay away from falsehood. Don't get yourself involved with that. That's the whole thing. Okay, that's the story.
I'm curious, Rabbi, what's the answer to that? Like,
what?
The Chumash.
Okay, so the Gemara gives there two possible answers, by the way. Right, two possible answers. One is that Yoshua wrote the rest.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote those last psukim. Right, that's one of the answers. Let's see what he says over here for a second. That's what I remember. That Yoshua did it. There's also another opinion there. Whatever, but anyway, right? Okay. So yeah, I think there's another opinion that Hashem wrote that, something like that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Different opinions. Hashem brought his pen, and wrote it in there. Okay, so Moshe Omer Katel Katel, right? So the way it was, it says there's one thing that we have to learn from there, right? Which is pertaining to our subject matter, which is that it says, right, that Hashem would say it, and Moshe would also repeat it and then write it. So you see from there that the right way to do it is to first say it and then to write it. This is the proper way. So that's the way it has to be done also for Tefillin. That's what we're saying over here. So it says, he writes that even though that there are books that's written in them, I'm sorry, it's not written in them. Moshe, it says just like Moshe, the Kotev Mikom Makom. In any case, it says the Soim the Garse Umoshe. There are, but the words, the books that have Umoshe, Omer Sarich Moshe Omer. I'm sorry, I didn't say it right. One more time. Even though there are books, Shein Katuv Behem Rak Umoshe, right? It says just Umoshe Kotev. It doesn't say that he was saying it. There are books like that. So that would contradict what we're trying to learn from this halakha. Because there are books that have a girsa, that have a text, that it doesn't say that he actually said it. He just wrote it. Mikom Makom says, nevertheless, the Sfarim the Garse Moshe Omer, but according to the books that have a girsa, that have the text, that Moshe said it, right? It says you have to be careful. You have to be careful. That it shouldn't be somebody else reading it. And he's writing. We don't want that. We don't want one guy saying it and one guy writing it. We don't want that. It should be the same guy. Until he actually says it himself. The same thing with Tefillin and Mezuzot. So he says, what is Machmir? Will be blessed. That's what it says in Tosfot, Vesamag, and also Smag. כתב סתם ואסור לאדם אחר להקריא את הספר לסופר. It also says, right, that it's asur that somebody else should read to the sofer, and the sofer writes. We don't want that. אלא אם כן חוזר וכותב, unless he himself also, right, he says it himself as well. כותב וקורא בפיו. He reads it with his mouth. קודם שיכתוב, before he writes it. שלא יטעה, because you know what the problem is? If he doesn't say it himself, the sofer, we're afraid he's going to make a mistake. That's what he's saying. So it says, like it says in Perakama, first Perak Babata, it says over there, Kadosh Baruch Hu Omer, Moshe Omer. That Hashem was saying, and then Moshe was saying. The kotev, and then writing it. That's what it says. That's what it says in the Mordechai. Perak comments in this Perak, the Birchot Ketanot, Halachot Ketanot, V'chen katav Samak. So all these Rishonim are writing the same thing. They all seem to agree. Uvagot Maimon, also this one. Umashma Midivrei Samag. So it says, comes out from the words of the Samag. Zehainu lechatchila. That's only lechatchila. In other words, about bediavad, eno nifsad lechach. But b'diavad, even if he didn't read it himself, if he didn't say it himself, it's not pasul b'diavad. It's only mechatchila. Ve'ari askandari, but it says this rabbi katav al divrei Rabbeinu. But it says he writes on the words of Rabbeinu. V'shikra kol teva. They should read every word, as we said, right? Harav katav stam. It says the rabbi wrote stam, undefined. But b'samag bokela b'meish kotev mipi acher. But in the Samag, he's talking about that he's reading from somebody else. As we said, somebody else he's reading it for him. He's not copying from a book. When he had the Huadin, now he says, same thing also seems to apply. The Misha Kotet al Peh, he's writing orally. And he's not, as we said, right? He's not really copying it from a book, because as we said, when it comes to Tefillin and Mezuzot, we don't really need that so much. Right? Nakat la harav stama. So he says, could be because of this, the rabbi wrote stam, undefined. Mishum the rob kotvet tefillin. Why? Because most the people who write tefillin, mezuzot kotvin otam al peh. They write it orally. Ad kan neshano. Right. So that's interesting. So it implies over here a little bit from this language that a person who knows it by heart and is not really copying it over, he doesn't really need to say it. But we'll see in the Shulchan Aruch what he says, right? The bottom line. It's the halakha. Lamed Aleph. Let's see what he says there. Okay, so says Shulchan Aruch Imeno kotev mitoch haktav. Oh, look, wait, right away. He gets into that, right? He says if he's not writing, if he's not copying it over, okay, he's just writing it orally, as we said, right? Lo yichtob al peh shemakre oto acher. So he says, then, if that's the case, he shouldn't write it according to somebody else who's reading it for him, like going with him together. Unless he himself also will say it, will read it. So that's an interesting way that he puts this halakha. Let's read it one more time. Make sure we understand what he means to say here. It's a little bit cryptic, maybe, perhaps. Right? So he says again, right? If he's not writing, if he's not copying over from a different source, right? He's not doing so. Lo yichtob al peh. Then don't do it in a way that he's doing it orally. Somebody else is reading it for him. Unless he himself does it as well. So it's this is like a chock full of information here. This halakha, we have to really analyze what he wants to say here. So, in other words, we got to figure out all the parameters here, right? In other words, what's the halakha according to what we just read? Okay, what's the halakha in a case where he's copying it over from a different halakha, from a different book, right? Does he need to read everyone? I'm sorry, what you think? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's interesting. I was thinking more like no, but I'm not really 100% sure. But let's just get it straight. Make sure we got it right. We'll see the Mishnah Berurah. Maybe he explains it also here, what he says about this. But anyway, it seems like he's saying like this, right? That if he's not copying it over, then he's got to be careful not to do it this way. He's not copying it over. So it implies that if he is copying it over, he doesn't really need this whole thing. Why is that? Because since he's looking at it, and copying it, there's no reason for him to read it out loud. Perhaps that's what he means. Perhaps. And so he says like this, right? That another thing he's pointing out here is that if he is not copying it over, he's saying he's doing it orally because he knows it orally. So then we don't want some guy, right, reading it out for him. So what we want is that he should say it. So it seems like from this halakha, possibly, he's trying to say like this, that if he's reading it, if he's doing it orally, then it seems like the halakha is that he needs to say it because he's doing it orally. So this will help him not to make a mistake. But let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. I'm just interested to see how he explains this. Right, he jumps on it right away. Exactly what I told you guys, right? So it says the Mishnah Berurah here, Mashma kishekotev mitoch haktav. So it implies from this language that if he's copying it over, and not tzarich leotzi bepiv, he doesn't have to say it anymore. Exactly what I told you. Right? So it says, but it's also dealing with the issue that he knows it also by heart. Oh, very good. So yeah, it seems to be holding like that, the Mishnah Berurah.
So then if you know it by heart and you're copying it over, then you don't have to say it out loud. Is that what they're saying? Right,
exactly. Yeah. In other words, if it's familiar to you, number one, you're familiar, and also you're copying it, so then you don't need this whole trick. So when do you really need it? When you're doing it Baal Peh, when you're doing it orally, right? That's the whole thing.
Okay.
But look what he says, right? There are also, he says, many achronim that are disagreeing with the Shulchan Aruch about this. That's a different opinion, okay? But according to the Shulchan Aruch, you don't need to do it in this case. That's the way it implies from this language. So, right, just to recap this whole thing, right? What are we talking about? That according to Shulchan Aruch anyway, right? The halacha is that if you're not copying it over, right? And you're doing everything orally because you're a big, you're very experienced already. You don't need to do this stuff. This is passé for you, no? That's nothing. You don't need it. So okay, fine, but then you've got to say it out loud, right? And it's not enough that somebody else says it. You got to say it yourself. That's what we're saying. And the reason is because you shouldn't come to err. You shouldn't come to make a mistake. This is the reason why but as we said, right, but diavad, if you didn't do it, it's kosher anyway. This is only lechatchila. This is the preferred way. But if you didn't do it, kosher. That's number one. Number two, if he is copying it over, according to Shulchan Aruch, it seems he doesn't need to do this. Why is that? Because he's, copying. When you copy it, you're not going to make a mistake like that. So there's no reason to do it out loud. That's the whole thing. Okay, interesting. There's different opinions also, besides this. But this is the Shulchan Aruch. My rabbi used to tell us, Manan Rabbi Shalom. Kibalnu horaot shel Manan. We paskin like Manan. We Sfardim, we go like Manan. We go like the Shulchan Aruch. So even though there's other rabbis that argue with Shulchan Aruch, we go like Manan. This is what I learned from the rabbi. 15 years, this was drumming into my ear, Chuk, 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 day and night, So that's why now I can't change the program anymore, I can't change the chip. Okay, thank God, Baruch Hashem. I'm happy the way I am. Okay, no complaints. All right, that's good. Let's go to Lamed Bet. Okay, so by the way, just want to tell you, regarding what I just mentioned, there's a book called En Itzhak, which was written by the rabbi's son, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, the chief rabbi. So he has like 3 volumes there, from this book, which is very, very genius. It's a very genius work. And important, these books are important. And they're talking about basically the laws of paskening halacha, how to pasken halacha, how, the rules are, and so forth and so on. And also how to learn the Talmud properly, the deductions of the Talmud. 3 volumes, one on halakha, one on Talmud, right? Different issues there. But interesting thing is, that he brings there in that book about 130 sources, 130, 130, okay, of the Achronim, the big later authorities, who all say that we go like the Shulchan Aruch. That's how we accepted the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, even the Ashkenazim, the truth is, they accepted it. But with the Ramah, of course, the Ramah, the glosses of the Ramah, which is their customs, So they did accept that too. But later on, the Ashkenazim, a little bit strayed away from the Shulchan Aruch, they went like other sources, Mishnah Brura, and Aruch HaShulchan, and the Gra, whatever. But we, the Sfardim, we remained loyal to Maran, Maran Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Spanish rabbi, the Spaniard, right? That we go like him. We accepted his rulings, so we're pretty loyal to him. We're on the ball with that most of the time. Unless the custom has changed, whatever. There are cases like that also, but pretty much that's how we go. Like there are Achronim who say, that even if 1,000 rabbis arguing with Maran, we still go like Maran. Even 1,000, 100 rabbis arguing with him, we don't care. We accepted the rulings of Maran. That's the way it is. Okay. So now we're going to Lamed Bet, Lev, right? The hearts. Going to the hearts. כתב סמ"ק, בסמ"ק, שצריך להניח חלק למעלה, חלק למטה. Says the Samak that you have to, when it comes to tefillin, the parchments, right? You have to leave a margin above and a margin below, some empty space above and below. Kemelo atva the safre, right? Like the custom is by the scribes. The Perek Kometz says over there in the Gemara, Aminan hachi gabe mezuzah. He also said that regarding mezuzah. You have to leave a margin above and a margin below. Katav Arosh, it's also, by the way, aesthetically, much better that way. I mean, if you're filling up the whole space, it doesn't look nice, It looks a little bit like overloaded, you know what I mean? Like it's about to spill out. It's too much, too many letters there. It's too saturated, So that's why we want, it should be nice and, there should be some space around it. It looks better that way, more aesthetic, more pleasing to the eye, blah, 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 right? All these things. So, okay, so it says, regarding this, this was the tour that I just read to you. Now it says in Bet Yosef, comments, Aminan, Achi, Gabe, Mezuzah. We already said this, right? And we said also regarding Mezuzah as well. Katav Rosh, says the Rosh, Birchot Mezuzah, in the laws of Mezuzah, Pershua Geonim. The Geonim explain, Shou Kechatzit Tziporen. Oh, so it says the measure of this is like half the size of a nail. Like your fingernail, as like that's what we're talking about. You have to leave that at least that much of a margin. Sefer Atruma, that could be, by the way, about a centimeter or something like that. Not really much. Not really so big. Could be even less than a centimeter. Atruma, right? It says the Siman Raishei Katav Shesh Omim Hatam Mishum Lichtov Tzavar Lamed B'Shita Elyona V'Kaf V'Tzadi Pashut B'Shita Achrona. Oh, so in this book, he brings a different reason than what I told you, right? It's not because of the aesthetics so much. He says that you need to have some space between the lines. I'm sorry, not between the lines. We're talking about the top line, right? And also the bottom line. That's where we need the margin, right? On the top and the bottom. So here's the thing. He says the reason why I have to do that is because, you have that lamed, right? So the lamed is, as we said, right? It's like the giraffe. It's got a big, long neck, going up to the sky. So we can eat from the tree, some leaves, whatever, whatever. Right? So it's a tall letter. It's the giraffe. So if you don't leave a margin, how are you going to put that giraffe in there, right? On the top of the parchment. You know what I mean? You won't have room. This is the reason why you got to leave some room there. Because otherwise your lamed is going to be expired, right? Before you get to the end of the lamed, the parchment will expire. If you know what I mean. Okay? That's we're talking about the top line. So he says, and also we have another issue, right? Which was the tzadi in the bottom line, right? So what does that mean? You're going like down there, So you need also a margin there to write it properly. So which tzaddik are we talking about, by the way? We're talking about tzaddik sofit, right? The end tzaddik, which is long. It's got a long leg, right? So since it's got that long leg, you need a margin to fill it out there. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem. You're going to get to the end of the parchment and won't be able to finish your long legs. Your long leg there, right? So this is the reason why you need it. So he says, if that's the case, you also need the same thing with tefillin as well, right? For the same reason, adkan, right? In other words, he was talking about Sefer Torah, so he's telling you, right, that the same thing is going to apply to tefillin as well. That's also the opinion of the Rosh. He writes over there, so he says you have to leave some margin upstairs and downstairs, as we said. So he says, how big does the margin have to be? He says the Rosh, like the giraffe of the lamed, right? That big neck, right? Make sure you get that big neck in there, right? We already mentioned, by the way, last week or whatever it was, right? That every letter has to be surrounded by parchment, right? Like in every side. So if that lamed is so tall, it's getting to the end of the parchment, it's not surrounded by parchment. So therefore it's pasul. This is the problem, So you got to make sure you don't make this mistake. So you gotta, So you gotta make sure that works out well. So therefore, leave the margin. That's the whole story. So he says also below Right? You have to make sure those long-legged letters, like the kaf sofit, nun sofit, right? Those end letters that have long legs, make sure that they fit in there. You have a big enough margin that it fits in. Atan. That's the end of the whole story. But he didn't mention these sizes that we said before, right? Like a half a nail and all this, right? Allah dat Rabbeinu, so he says, therefore, Rabbeinu, the Tur, thought to say, that it's a different size, as if there's a machloket here about the size of the margin. לכן כתב, ואדוני אבי הרוסה כתב שאין צריך להניח חלק למעלה. So he says, therefore, he says, my father, the Rosh, didn't really say you have to leave it that much. Just until you have enough room for the lamed, right? The giraffe. So he says it's not really so. Maran is correcting that, right? He's saying that it's not so. In other words, there's no machloket here between these rabbis. There's no dispute. They're all saying the same size. This is all the same. So that's like I wrote in Orchot Chaim. כתוב צריך, I'm sorry, yeah. שכתבתי, like I wrote. Okay, very good. ובאורחות חיים, says, in Orchot Chaim כתוב, צריך להניח מלמעלה ומטה כמלוא עטבה. He says, this is like the saper, right? You have to leave enough like the whatever the scribes do. ושיערו הגאונים כמלוא אחיזת חצי ציפורן. So the Geonim said, what size is that? It's like a half a nail, right? So you see it's the same size, really. It's all the same thing. יש אומרים שצריך להניח מלמעלה אחר השלמת למד ומלמטה אחר השלמת צדי. And some say it has to be long enough to get that giraffe in there on the top, right? And on the long-legged thing on the bottom, as we mentioned. ויש אומרים דלא צריך אלא שיעור מצומצם. And some say you only need like a little bit, not really much. ורבנו יונה פסק כדת הראשון. So I said, רבנו יונה passed like the first opinion. Okay, very good. So then he goes on to say, ובתחילתן וסופן אין צריך להניח כלל. But he says, when it comes to the sides, you don't need side margins, he says. No reason for that. No reason for side margins. Okay. So says the Bet Yosef regarding that. That's what it says in the Rosh, but says that Tikkun Tefillin over there in this source. The kasher, so it's a little bit difficult. שבהלכות מזוזה, because in the laws of מזוזה, כתב ויראה שצריך להניח בתחילה כדי לגול היקף כיוון שנכרכת מאחד כלפי שמה, כמו בספר תורה, למען דאמר לתחילתו הוא נגלל, ומה ישנה תפילין שאינו צריך להניח כלל. So he says a little bit of a difficulty. Why? Because the Rosh says regarding Sefer Torah, you should leave a margin on the sides. You should leave one. So he says, then what's the difference between Sefer Torah and Tefillin? Why do we say for Sefer Torah you need a margin, and for Tefillin you don't need a margin? Right? So he says, that's what it says in Orchot Chaim. Shari bar Sheniur, this rabbi, matzrich b'Tefillin le'aniach b'tchila kedei lagul. So he says, but this rabbi also says that you need a margin there. So how much margin do you need? He says enough to wrap the scroll, right? Because the tefillin is also like a parchment, right? It's like you're winding it around like a circle, right? So you have to have enough space there to wind around, empty space around the whole thing, a margin. That's what he says. It's possible that the reason of the Rosh is because of what? It says in Sefer Truma, Siman Reish the Gabe Mezuzah en tzarich lebach betchilat midanahag u'olam. So he says, but when it comes to Mezuzah, he says you don't need any margin in the beginning. Midanahag u'olam lichtov Mezuzah letzad shachor, because he says the minhag is to write the Mezuzah on the black side. Shaddai, right? The word Shaddai, which is the name of God. Between the empty space, the space between Shema and Behaya, im Shamua, they all seem nekev katan, says make a small hole, b'kaneh halul, with a hollow reed or whatever, something like that. Shemezuzah betocho, which is inside there. But nekev yesh the etz, and there's also a hole in the wood. Shem Shaddai, that should be seen, that right, the name of God should be seen from the outside. It should be showing that name. Ve'im tzarich gilayon, so it says, do you need a margin? Chalak betchilata, at the beginning, in order to wrap it around with a margin. In ken, so it says, en Hashem nireh b'chutz. If that's the case, the name will not be visible from the outside. Now, that's what we want. So therefore, that's the reason why with mezuzah, we don't want to have that margin, because we want to have the name visible outside. That's the whole thing. Vehu adin b'tefillin. It's the same thing with tefillin. Shen tzarich. I says you don't need a margin there. It says for tefillin. So what does that mean? You don't need a margin on the sides. There's no purpose for that. Im ken en Hashem nireh b'chutz. I'm sorry. Shen tzarich ad kan Hashem. V'chen katav Mordechai. That's what it says in Mordechai. Hashem ratz. In the name of the ratz. Mitoch shira'a rosh te mezuzah. So it says since the Rosh saw, when it comes to mezuzah, shenit paresh ba b'gemara. There was explained the Gemara. Shiur revach le'ma'ala u'mata. That there is a margin that you need above and below. Lo nahagu ha'olam le'aniach klal b'tchilat. It says now the custom is that we don't put any margin in the beginning. Katab sefer tikun tefillin. So therefore he wrote in this book, den tzarich le'aniach klal. You don't have to put any margin b'tchilat in the beginning. Tefillin, and also with tefillin, the sof afilu, whether it's the sof afilu mezuzah, and in the end it says even with mezuzah, so there she'enot tzarich le'aniach. You don't have to leave it either. Sharei lo katav denireh she'tzarich le'aniach. So because he didn't write that, it seems like he has to leave a margin there. Only beginning. Since he gives a reason, because it was already wrapped, right? Because it's lechatchila, it's wrapped. Okay, let's see the Shulchan Aruch, how he paskins about this. Very interesting halacha. So it says like this in Shulchan Aruch. Tzarich le'aniach chalak lemala. As we said, right, with tefillin, you need a margin above. In order to put your giraffe, right, lamed there, right, there. You got to have enough space for that. Right, says the Rama, Haga, sheyu gam hem mukafin dvil. So what's the purpose, right? As we mentioned, the Rama repeats it, that it should be surrounded by parchment, right? That big deck, right? It has to be surrounded by parchment. So you have to have enough space there. Otherwise, it's going to go till the end. That's not going to be good. Right? Ulamata, it says below, kashur kaf venun. You have to have enough to put those long-legged letters, Kaf sofit, nun sofit, pshuta, v'tchilatam. Beginning, what about the beginning of Sofan? What about the right and left? Do you need a margin there? Right? And tzarich le'aniach klal. You don't need a margin there, right? That's halakha. Regarding tefillin, this is the halakha. You don't need a margin. Okay. So now comes the Rama. And says, but he says the custom is to leave a little bit margin on the sides as well. In other words, you don't really need it, but the custom is to do so. Interesting. All right, it may be only by the Ashkenazim, by the way, this custom. I don't know if the Sfaradim do it this way. But it makes sense, a little bit, because, it just looks better, as we said, right? When you have a margin, it just looks nicer. So, you gotta, whatever. Ben kol teva v'teva kimlo ot. So he says you should leave between each word enough to put a letter there. You understand what he's saying? In other words, how do you space between the words? How much space do you need between each word? So he says you have to have enough space for one letter. It's like when we had those old typewriters, whatever, and even with the computers, right? Like there's a tabulation, you can do the tabulation, right, the way you want. So the tabulation here is one space letter between each word. That's the way it's done. That's what he says. Okay, good. It looks nice that way. Whatever. Also, it says between the lines of each line of the tefillin, you should leave like one line space. We need that because, as we said, right? Because Some of the letters are tall. Some of the letters have big legs, right? So you have enough space between each line. You can put those big-necked and big-legged letters, like we mentioned. That's the idea. Good. Okay, so then it says, and it says, oh, look what it says, right? How much space do we put between each letter of each word? Right? Between one letter and the other. How much space do we have? So it says it should be like hair's breadth, like not really much. Just enough space, that it should be surrounded by parchment, as we said. You really don't have to put much, right? It has to look like one word, as we mentioned yesterday, right? If it doesn't look like one word, it looks like two words, it's a problem. So you shouldn't put too much space there. So what does he say? Put a hair's breadth, not too much, really, right? Minimal. Good. כמו בספר תורה, like ספר תורה. וכמו שהתברר בטור יודע, like it's going to explain the טור יודע. גם צריך להניח מעט חלק בין פסוק לפסוק. So he says, also you have to leave some space, he says, between each verse, right? So in other words, you should know that this is a new verse beginning there. New pasuk. Okay, very good. That's pretty clear. Let me see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. How much should you put between each pasuk, between each verse? He mentions this here, Mishnah Berurah. Let's see what it says. So Mishnah Berurah says that Magen Avraham and several Achronim don't agree with the Ramah here. And they say you don't really have to put extra space between one pasuk and the other. Just like between one word and the other, it says. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. But the truth is, that the Ashkenazim, they go like the Ramah. But sometimes there's different customs as well. Okay. Let's go to Lamed Gimel. So says the Bet Yosef, Ve'aseh shurot shavot, should make the lines equal. Shelot tehe echad nichneset ve'echad yotzet, right? You don't want like uneven lines, one sticks out from the other. So this is for, I guess, aesthetic purposes, right? It doesn't look nice when one sticks out like that. It doesn't look even. So you got to try to make it as even as possible, that it shouldn't be uneven, the lines. Ken katav Aruch, that's what it says in Aruch, Beseder Tikkun Tefillin, the source. V'chen katuv b'samak, also on the smag. B'samak, also samak. V'chen katuv b'sefer Truma, Siman Reish Hey, v'zeh leshono, this is the language of the Truma. Tzarich sheyeh ktiva shitin shaveh be'orech. So the length of the line should be equal, more or less. Daf agav degabe mezuzah, it says, even though regarding mezuzah, right, shalosh, shtayim, ve'echad, sheolech mekatzer hashitin. So it says over there, what we do is the lines get shorter, like gradually, like some kind of an opposite pyramid. Well, I don't know whatever that is. And if you made like some kind of a song, because the songs in the Torah are shaped a certain way, right? So the one big and one small, hakol kasher, it's kosher. In other words, he's telling you, right, shema between and okay. Maybe perhaps with Tefillin it's not so. So he's saying, right, that at least the chatchila, you should make it like that. The line should be even. This is probably for aesthetic purposes. It doesn't look nice otherwise. So he says, then he goes on, V'lo yichtov shalosh otiyot chutz leshita. Right? So what does that mean? He says, don't write, not what does that mean, but this is a different halakha. Don't write 3 extra letters outside of the line. right? Maybe we should see the tour regarding this. What he says, how he describes this. One second. Right. So it says like this, the tour. Don't write 3 letters outside of the line. Right, so okay, that's a different story already. So there's really nothing else in the tour there. It's pretty much quoted verbatim. So there's nothing to add there. But anyway, it says in Bet Yosef, Ken Katuv Besamak. That's what it says in the Samak. Hagot Maimon, also Hagot Maimon. Perek Zayin Beta'ama Midiaminan. What's the reason why? You shouldn't write 3 letters like that. Nakometz, it says over there in the Gemara, in Menachot, the Pacific Torah, En Nizdamna Lo Teva, Im Nizdamna Teva Bat Chamesh Utiyot. So it says like this, right? If you have a Pacific Torah, a word which is like 5 letters, Lo Yichtov Shtayim Betoch Hagdaf, don't write 2 within the margin, right? And then Shalosh Chutz Ladaf, and 3 out of the margin. Don't do that. 3 letters like sticking out. So what should you do? What the proper thing to do is put 3 inside the margin, and you could put 2 outside. So the maximum you could do outside is 2, not 3. The Tefillin. So he says implies the same thing also applies to Tefillin. Biur Divrei Rabbeinu says, what's the explanation of this? The words of the tour. Kenhu b'tchila katav sheizahar she'aseh shurot shavot. So first he said the tour, make sure you make the lines even. Right, that was the first thing that he mentioned. Right, shelo teh yotzet shum shita afilu ot echad. That it shouldn't be sticking out even 1 letter from the line. So then how does he tell us now it shouldn't be 3? Right, before he told us even 1 is no good. Yoter ואחר כך כתב שאם יהיה מוכרח לעשות שום שיטה יוצאת מחבותה. So then he what he meant to say like this, right? That afterwards, let's say you weren't able to do it that way, you got no choice pretty much, like you're stuck. Sometimes you get stuck, the way you write these things doesn't come out always the way you wanted. So let's say, right, you got stuck and you got now a word which is sticking out, so it has to stick out, otherwise it's gonna, it's not going to be able to, you can't finish it. So the question is, how much can it stick out? So he's telling you, right, that don't put 3. 3 is too much. You can't stick out by 3. The maximum it can stick out is by 2. And that's the idea. That's only lechatchila. But bediavad, it's not pasul. So even if he's made it stick out 3, it's not pasul. It just doesn't look nice, It's not very aesthetic. Sefer Torah, lo mifsil b'hachi. So even Sefer Torah is not pasul. Even if Sefer Torah, if you have 3 letters sticking out, it's not pasul. So the same thing with Tefillin, right? B'divrei Rabbeinu b'Sefer Yorodea. Like it says in Yorodea, laws of Sefer Torah over there. Siman Reish Ein Gimel u'Kedivrei Rambam. Also like Rambam, Perek Zayin. Same thing Rambam says, right? That b'diavad it's kosher, even if it's 3 letters. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch. We're done, right? We'll finish there. I don't want to rack your brains too much tonight. So we'll finish there. Okay, we're moving along pretty well. It's a very big chapter. So it says like this, right? Yaseh ashurot shavot. Make the lines equal, as we said, right? The length should be equal. Shalot teh echad nikneset ve'echad yotzet. We don't want like 1 going in, 1 going out, right? Like some buck teeth, one goes in, 1 goes out. Doesn't look nice, right? So so he says, but he says even if you have to do it, you have no choice. But try not to do 3. 3 is no good. But if he wrote even 3, It's not pasul, right? This is the halacha. Okay, I guess we'll stop here. All right, we did an hour or whatever, so not too bad. Okay, very good. Thanks for coming tonight. Be blessed.
Thank
It was
you so
well,
much.
happiness. It was a nice class, Baruch Hashem. We got something done. We're moving along. I hope I didn't lose lose some of you. I don't know. I hope I didn't lose anybody. Okay. It wasn't very
Thank you,
difficult
Rabbi.
tonight. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just saying thank you.
God bless you. God bless you. Thanks for coming. Be blessed. Have a good night. Laila Tov. Chazak u'baruch.
Laila tov.
Chazak u'baruch.